All right, you've all received a paper that looks like the one that is on the screen. In the past, you have learned about one whole. One whole is the big, giant square that is written. This right here is one whole. So like question number 1 on that quiz, they had 3 of these. 3 of these one holes. You learned that. Okay, that's why it has the large square equals one whole. Second, we have one row. Rows run horizontally. Each of these rows is 1/10. Each of these rows equals 1/10. Which you studied 1/10. Anybody have an idea why they may be called 1/10? Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? Bueller? Yes, ma'am.
It's a row of 10.
Because it's a row of 10?
No.
Okay. Kind of there. Kind of there, yes, sir.
It's 10%.
It's 10%. Or it takes 10 of them to make one whole. It takes 10 of them to make a whole. So, we've learned this is one whole. So, one whole, you have a 1 in front of a decimal point. Oh, that should be 0. You have a 1 in front of your decimal point. Everything that goes behind your decimal point is going to be less than 1. Less than 1. So we have here it says 1 row equals 1/10. So this whole row is 1/10, which I have it written here as 0 and 1/10. Anybody know how else 1/10 could be written? Yes, sir.
0 behind it.
Okay, I could put a 0 behind it. I could put 1,000 zeros behind it. That's not going to change the value. This is not going to change the value. Yes, sir.
You could just put 1 with the decimal sign.
Okay, I could put 0.1. Can I write that as a fraction? Anybody know how to write that number here, 1/10, as a fraction? Ethan?
1 and then 11 and then 10.
Good. 1/10 can be written as a decimal, 1/10, or as a fraction, 1/10. You'll notice that fractions and decimals are the same thing. They're interchangeable. I can say, hey, I got a $50. And you might say, I only have 50 cents. Those are the same thing. Fractions and decimals are the same thing. So we know we have a whole. We've learned wholes. We know we have a 10th. And it's called a 10th, we know, because it takes 10 of these to make one whole. Now, here we have this square right here. Does anybody have an idea of what that square right there represents? So just one of these squares, this one right here on the bottom left-hand side, what does that one square represent? Yes, ma'am. 100th. And why does it represent 100th? Good, because it takes 100 of these to make a whole. So that's why this little one right here is 1/10. Again, written as 0.1, or a fraction 1 over 10. This one's 100th, 1 over 100, or 0.01. So the 1 square, and I may have misspoken when I said that, so if you're watching the video later, please forgive me. So 1 square like this equals 100th. You have learned previously that the 100th is 2 places behind the decimal point. So this is the 10ths place, and this is the 100ths place. So let me ask you a question. Which is bigger? Hannah? Which is bigger? Which has the bigger value? 1/10 or 100th? 1/10 is bigger because 1/10 is an entire row. 1/10 is an entire row. So, por ejemplo, that's for example. For example, this, and I know my arms in the way. I don't know how else to do this. I'll practice. This right here, where I just shaded in, that is 1/10. That is 1/10. This is 100. How would I make 400ths? How would I make 400ths, Mr. Leverett? If this is 100th, how would I make 400ths?
Fill in 4 squares.
Fill in 4 of these. 4 of these, 1, 2, 3, 4. If 4 of these were shaded in, that would be 400ths, or 0.04. How would I make 3/10ths? How would I make 3/10ths? Yes, ma'am.
Shading in 3 rows.
3 rows. So if I shaded in 3 of these, that would be 3/10ths. So let me ask you another question. Mia, which is greater, 3/10ths or 400ths?
3/10.
3/10ths. And this is where people get confused. 3/10ths is written like that, 3/10ths, but 400ths is written like that. Now when we only go to tenths and hundredths, I like to think of it as money, 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 money.
Money!
And a tenth would be worth what?
10 cents.
10 cents or a dime. So if I said you have 1/10 of a dollar, that means you have a dime.
We have 3 cents of it.
100th of a dollar is a penny. Because it takes 100 pennies to make a dollar. It takes 10 dimes to make a dollar. It takes 10 of these tenths to make a dollar. And it takes 100 of these pennies to make a dollar. 100 of the hundredths. Yes, sir.
If you're gonna compare it to money though, you have to have if you're just doing a tenth and not 100, you still have to put the 100 place.
Good. That's kind of where I'm going with this. Now, if you were asked to compare those two numbers, 0.3 and 0.04, you had a test question, and it said, compare these two numbers, 3/10ths and 400ths. Now, as I mentioned before, and as someone helped me mention before, if these are dimes, right? Tenths are dimes. And so how much is 10 dimes worth?
30 cents.
30 cents. So I could take and make it 0.3 or 0.30. And I can prove that because if it's talking about 3/10, this is 1/10. This is 2/10. And this is 3/10. So I have 3 of these rows shaded in. So how many hundredths do I have shaded in?
30.
30. So that tells me I can put my 0 here, and 30 hundredths is the same as saying 3/10. So I can add a 0 to the back, and it makes it easy to compare. I could add 4,286 zeros to the back if I wanted. I don't want to. But I could do that to compare with decimals. Okay, so if I wanted to just continue adding 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, I'm not changing the value. So if you have a decimal point, after the last digit in your decimal point, if you just want to start adding zeros because you're zero crazy, you can go ahead and do that. You don't have to. But you do want to make them so that they go out to the same number of places behind the decimal point. You do want to make sure they go out the same number of places behind the decimal point. Now we've got something else that we've added here. Or I have added and not added very well because I don't draw very well. But if you look here, I've taken this 1/10, 100th, and I've divided that into tenths. So I got 10
1,000.
out of 100. It's going to be 1,000th. So each one of these parts right here, each one of those parts right there is going to equal the third place behind the decimal point is the 1,000th place. Now what you're going to see, what's going to happen, is I'm going to say, you have 7 thousandths. And if you look at that, that's not even 1 whole hundredth. So 7 thousandths is written like this. 7 thousandths is written like this. I always put my sevens backwards if I'm writing upside down. But 7 thousandths is this. But it's only part of this. It's not even 1 whole hundredth. And as I said, so if this whole little square right here is 100th, that would be how that's written, because we're in the ones, tenths, hundredths, and I said earlier, I could put a 0 at the back and make this a thousandth. Now we have 7,000 and 10 thousandths. So that's obviously, that means there's 10 thousandths in this, or 10 thousandths in this 100th. It's confusing because when you look in front of the decimal point, hundreds are bigger than tenths. But when you go back behind the decimal point, if you think of money, you would rather have 1/10 than 100th. You'd rather have 10 cents than 1 cent. And again, I just added this 0 to the back because I could add as many zeros to the back that I want. So I want you to make sure on your paper, if it's not already written, is that the whole square here equals 1 whole. And that is written there. And it's written with a 1 in front of a decimal point. So if you had 2 of these whole squares, it'd be 2. If you had 148 of these whole squares, you'd have 148. One row, so this entire row is 1/10. So I have one row equals 1/10. And that's how that's written. Either as a fraction, 1/10, or as a decimal, 0.1. One little square is 100th. And that's how that's written as a decimal. It can be also written as a fraction, 100th. Yeah, it can be written as a fraction, 100th. And each of these little ones is 1,000th. So each of these little ones, and I have that wrong here, is 1,000th within the 100th. Sorry. I messed that up. Within the 100th equals 1,000th. So each one of these little marks right here within the 100th, so these little marks are inside of 100th. Each one of them equals 1,000, which can be written okay? So now, if they asked you to compare greater than, less than, equal to, remember you can put your zeros at the back. They asked greater than or less than. You can always put your zero at the back. If they said put an order of least to greatest, you want to make sure they go out to the same value behind the decimal point. And one other thing that we might see all right, what is the value of the 3 in this number? Can anybody tell me the value of the 3 in this number? Oh, yes, ma'am. Not 30. Not 30. Yes, ma'am. 3/10. So the value of this 3 is going to be 3/10. I'm going to turn that over because the value of the 3 is 3/10. So if it said, hey, what's the value of the underlying digit? The value is 3/10 because it's a 3 and it's in the 10th place. The value of the 6 would be what, class?
600.
600. 600. Now another thing they might ask you to do is they may give you a number, they being me, might give you a number and then ask you to write it in expanded form. You've done expanded form before. So if I gave you the number 327 and 4/10, you've done expanded form before, but not all the way out to the thousandths place. You would have 3 times 100, which would give us 300. 3 times 100 would give us 300, plus 2 times what? 10. Because that would give us 20, and the 2's in the tens place, so we want 2 tens. Makes it 20. Plus what?
7.
Just plus 7. We don't have to multiply it by anything, because the identity process of multiplication is if you multiply anything by 1, it equals itself. So 7 plus 4 times what? What place value is the 4 in? No?
Tenths.
Tenths. It's directly behind the decimal point. So plus 4 times 1/10. Now, as we said earlier, it can also be written as a fraction. So you might see this exact same thing written but instead of 4 times 1/10, it might be 4 times 1/10 written as a fraction. I know, right? Isn't this cool?
Yeah.
So if we have the number 279 and 139 thousandths. 279 and 139 thousandths. So somewhere on your paper, try and write this in expanded form. I'll give you a minute to write it in expanded form. And then I'll write it down. You'll look at it and see how you did. Yes, ma'am.
Is that a comma or a decimal?
That's a decimal point right here. 279 and 139 thousandths. 279 and 139 thousandths. So 279.139. So write that number down, because I'm going to take mine off the screen so I can write it in expanded form and then let you look at it. So I'm going to be tricky. I want you to see. Nuh-uh. So keep writing. I'll put mine up there in a minute.
Numbers after the decimal.
279 and 139 thousandths. I know. I want you to try. And then we'll look at it. I want you to try, and then we'll look at it, okay? So I'm not going to slap your hand if you get it wrong or anything like that. Well, maybe you, Ava, but not anybody else. Okay, so try and write it. You know what's in front of the decimal point first. Okay, so let's look. We move from the greatest digit to the smallest digit. We have 2 times 100, because that's going to give us 200, plus 7 times 10, because I want it to equal 70, because the 7's in the 10's place, plus 9. I don't have to multiply 9 by anything, because the 9 is in the 1's place, plus 1 times 1/10, because my 1 is in the 10th's place, so I can write that as a fraction or as a decimal, plus 3 times 1/100th as a fraction, or 3 times 1/100th as a decimal, because my 3 is in the 100th place, plus 9 times 1,000th, or 9 times 1,000th, because my 9 is in the thousandths place. Do not, under any circumstances, freak out, because this is your introduction to all this material. It is not everything you've learned in tomorrow's a test. This is just an introduction. No, I said it is not that you should know this by now. No. This is an introduction. Tomorrow we move on. We'll continue learning. But this gives you an overview of what we're going to see as far as decimals. One of the other things we'll do is we'll round. So one of the other things we'll do is we'll round decimals. Now in a moment, you're going to put that paper in your journal. In a moment, you're going to put that paper in your journal. You'll have notes in your journal that you're going to be gluing in. That's why I said, keep your journal. Someday it'll save your life. Someday, some masked man will run up to you and say, you are in trouble and I'm going to throw you out of this airplane if you can't write this number in expanded form. Of course you may use your journal. And then you use your journal and the bad guy's like, darn it! I can't throw you out of the plane. So you're going to get a lot of notes in this journal. You're going to get a lot of notes in this journal. Questions before we start gluing?
No.
Boom! Shakalaka!